Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at, ladies and gents. I am Kura Isagami, and I'm going to be starting a brand new little mini-series, for lack of a better term, that I want to call Robattle Studies 101. Now, I've had a lot of people come to me with questions, both in our community Discord and through Messenger and so on and so forth, and even on my YouTube channel asking what the general ups and downs of certain mechanics are, like metals natures, ailments especially I get a lot of questions on. So I wanted to take some time to kind of break down some general basics and mechanics over what exactly some of these other mechanics and behaviors are to make it easier for folks to explain both veteran and newcomer alike. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the first lesson of this little mini-series, Robattle Studies 101, Status Ailments, an Edge over Competition. Now in this, I'm basically just going to take each different type of ailment as I personally kind of sort them or break them down to make it easier to understand and recognize, as well as kind of give a brief explanation over how each ailment behaves. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the first set of ailments that I did line up on the list, not necessarily by order of priority, but simply the overall usefulness of each. First of which are Paralyzed Elements. Now, simply put, these are ailments that will simply stop an enemy cold in their tracks in their heat or cool phase, with various additional perks or weaknesses, depending on if you're on the receiving end or as the sender. But just to break down what the three that are listed here are, they are Shock and Thundershot, Freeze and Freeze Shot, and then Tornado. Now, Shock and Thundershot, it's relatively easy to tell, same with Freeze and Freeze Shot. It's simply the melee and the shooting variant, respectively. Simply put, with Shock and Thundershot, the target can still defend attacks, but they cannot dodge. So aside from being unable to move, essentially, they will still, any hit that you make is guaranteed to land, even if it means that they can reduce damage on that incoming strike. Freeze and Freeze Shot, on the other hand, have a little bit more oomph behind it, and that's the fact that the target cannot defend or dodge, so they are a sitting duck the entire time they're frozen there in that spot. But if you do choose to capitalize it, that does mean that whatever hit does land while in frozen state is guaranteed to land, and guaranteed a critical hit, no less. So Shock, Freeze, and Freeze Shot honestly by itself makes it a fantastic addition to any team for stun locking or for high damage nuking, especially to capitalize on that free critical hit too. So pairing that with, say, Ghost Shot, Full Charge, and so forth, and then using Freeze to stop them in place first can pile for a lot of really high damage. I would say the newer one of the three that came out fairly recently is Tornado, which means the target cannot defend or dodge, very similar to Freeze or Freeze Shot. Again, next hit is guaranteed critical hit, meaning that every hit that lands is going to be absolutely painful. One thing to note as well is it only gives you basically one free shot. Upon attacking a foe that is in paralyzed state, it will freeze them from the status, and thus allow them to move freely once again. So essentially, at that point, you have to decide if you want to make the hit last with a critical hit that's guaranteed, or if you want to buy yourself some time and let them sit there for about a turn or a turn and a half before you actually go and make use of the nuking skill. The other benefit to Tornado is that you can also use the new weakness that makes him susceptible to anti-air based attacks. So anyone that makes use of anti-air, that includes Shafu, Golf Bullet, Float Spinner. Anyone that uses anti-air can very easily capitalize on Tornado for that very high damage bonus, times 7 actually, if the part is fully capped at 5-star. Now, one other note to make a mention of here, just for the sake of mentioning it, Paralyzed Ailments do not stack, meaning that once you paralyze someone, you cannot stun lock them. Ideally, the best way to stun lock a foe at this current stage in the game is simply to freeze them solid, either with any of the above mentioned attacks, and then of course follow up behind with, say, Virus or Bug, so that you can guarantee a stun and then a turn skip on top of that. But it looks like relatively early on they were able to have that where you could stun lock permanently, but then relatively quickly they did kind of patch that out, unfortunately. But for the sake of balance of the game, it is very openly welcome nonetheless. The next ailments that are on the list is turn skipping. This is another very popular Very popular choice in very high competitive meta teams to guarantee that if you can outrun a foe, then they can't strike and you still get away with some minor damage. Turn skipping, as its name implies, means that if it hits a foe in heat phase, their turn when they get to the line is going to be skipped and they will not accomplish an action. So that is the minimum guarantee across the board for all of them, aside from the counterpart bonuses. Virus, of course, turn is skipped regardless of position. Target cannot dodge until cooldown is complete, so any hit that you make is guaranteed to land. Now, if you are using Virus, it does cancel basic guards, so that includes Guard 300, Guard 500, Shoot Guard as well, because Virus is more often than not a melee skill. So if you use it wisely, you can actually use it to cancel shields, or maybe buy yourself that extra turn against a potential nuker or someone more dangerous on the field. Same way can be said with Bug, which is the counterpart, whereas instead of being unable to dodge, they're unable to defend. So if the hit does land, it is guaranteed to be a critical hit while in their cooldown phase. Also very good to make use of, but honestly the turn skipping alone makes them a very highly sought after skill on the field. The more unique of the group thus far, and probably the lesser known of them all, is Flash. And what this does, much like turn skipping, has a little bit of an extra kick to it. Flash, instead of guaranteeing the turn is skipped no matter where you hit them, Flash will automatically trigger the foe to begin cooldown no matter where they're at in their heat phase. Unlike Virus and Bug, which will force them to finish the phase in order to fail the action and then start cooldown. Now, the other benefit to Flash as well is that it will make them unable to dodge or defend in their cooldown phase while they're running back the line. So basically kind of like a hand in the cookie jar or caught with your pants down kind of situation. A lot of folks like to make use of it as a Deathlock Light, essentially, because it does have a very powerful use to it if put in the right team and in the right capable hands. And then lastly, the last of the turn skipping skills is Slip. This one target's turn is skipped regardless of position in heat phase, but it will always target legs. So irregardless of the metal nature of the metal, it will always target the legs, and if it catches them in heat phase, like Slip or like Flash, it will automatically cancel whatever action they were going to complete. It can also cancel any shield. I want to make this very clear when it comes to Slip. It can cancel any kind of guard, be that perfect, mirror, counter, shoot, etc. I actually saw this one time when I used Perfect Guard on a team. I tanked the hit at 0 damage, but then my shield then expired that same turn. So very handy to make use of nonetheless if you can put it on the team or fit it in as maybe a potential punish or shield cancel ailment no matter where you put it. The next set of ailments on the list are debuffs. Now these probably won't be used as often, but still do have some very powerful effects in their own right. There's Wave, which debuffs the target's heat and cool by 25%. This also is standard across the board with debuff ailments, so Hold and Deathlock also will do the same. The difference just is that with Wave, it will allow the opponent to dodge, but they cannot defend attacks. So that means any hit that lands is guaranteed to be a critical hit and deal the highest damage possible. Hold, as the counterpart to that, means the opponent can defend but not dodge, so any hit is guaranteed to land nonetheless at normal or reduced damage. Both of these are very solid in their own right, especially with the heat and cool debuff in this state. Now naturally, the best of the three in this case is Deathlock, which has both the no dodge and no defense status, and the heat cool debuff on top of that. So if you are going to use any of these, Deathlock definitely is the one to go with first, but Heat Wave and Hold also have benefits in their own right. Now one other thing to make note of here, Wave and Hold will stack. So if you have both variants on your team and you inflict the same ailment, they will stack on top of each other for essentially what would be Deathlock with more steps involved. So definitely worth something to keep in mind in the meantime, but of the three, Deathlock probably is the big MVP ailment you will see on a lot of teams, and is the main reason that you will often see moves like Stat Cleanse in high competitive meta to counteract that. The next set of ailments is Sealing ailments. Now these are probably going to be the least used of them all, but they still do have some very handy effects in their own right if used correctly. Defense Seal guarantees that the target can still dodge attacks but not defend them, so basically guaranteed critical hits on every single hit that lands. Basically, anything except flight legs and sea legs will be basically easy pickings in this sense. Evade Seal is the opposite, where the opponent is able to defend against attacks but not dodge them. So you won't have to worry anymore about your very low success attacks missing. With Evade Seal on the table, they'll basically be tanking everything, no matter how much damage they take. Metaphor Seal probably is the least used even of the sealing skills, but still useful in its own right, as it prohibits the target from being able to unleash Metaforce. Now, this means they can still charge Metaforce as a stall turn, or they can get a Metaforce bonus from any attacks or skills that are Metaforce reliant, but they cannot unleash Metaforce either as a nuke or as a support skill. So for a lot of folks or EX trials that start with, say, enemy starts at 100% Metaforce, this is a really good way to nip that in the bud quick so they can't nuke that on you and turn the tides in the first 1 or 2 turns. The last of which is Canceller, where the target is simply prohibited from using the attack that takes the attack. However, this also can only be applied once per target, so you want to usually pay attention to metal nature in this sense if you want to try to have a little bit of a say essentially in what parts actually get canceled and nullified in this case. Of course, all these ailments and the ones listed up to this point can be canceled with stat cleanse, but of the two that are mentioned here, I would say Defense Seal and Evade Seal will probably see more use than Metaphor Seal or even Canceller in most teams. Probably not even competitive meta, but in most teams just in general. Up next, we also have Damage Over Time. Now, no game is complete without a Damage Over Time ailment, especially if it is heat-based. Simply put, these will start sapping enemy HP over time, over certain amounts. Fire and Fire Shot, and then Melt and Melt Shot, both of which, again, much like with Thunder and Freeze, it's simply the melee and the shooting variant of both. The DOT effect that the opponent is ailed with will scale with part rank. So of course, at rank 5, it'll have the highest amount of damage per turn. I also do want to mention in this case that Fire and Melt DOTs will stack on top of each other, much like Wave and Hold will. So you can actually put 2 DOTs on the same target if you choose to make use of both of them on the team. Now, more often than not, Flame attacks and Melt attacks will not have pierce damage because they are ailments. That is perfectly fine, because the damage that they eat over time will more often than not pay back the amount you would have done with a pierce damage blow anyway. Flame, of course, is another variant of this that applies a DOT effect to target and to self. So you basically set both the target and yourself on fire with this one, but at the cost that while you're on fire, you get a times 1.5 damage bonus whenever you use the flame skill. Same case can be said for Meteor, which is a gunpowder variant and a shooting variant of the attack, but it only applies the DOT effect to yourself and not to the target. So in cases like this, I probably would not recommend, and normally I would not recommend wanting to inflict yourself with an ailment anyway, but if you're able to fit it in with an ailment, with a leg ability with, say, Adversity, where you get a damage bonus relative to how many ailments you're inflicted with, you could probably capitalize on this pretty well. Next up are Ailment Punish. Now, this one was kind of strange to group, and I actually put this one more as like a miscellaneous ailment kind of thing that didn't quite fit into any other category. But just to cover each of these briefly, Level Drain will debuff the target's metal level for a certain amount of time. So this will actually, unlike most other ailments, which will say just cut heat and cool or damage or anything like that, this Level Drain will actually overall reduce the enemy's overall and in general performance while on the field. That includes damage, that includes speed, heat, cool. So this one can be particularly catastrophic if you use it carefully. But by itself and at low levels, it really doesn't do a lot that you would see as any particularly noticeable debuff. Next is Discharge, which simply when attacking a target will dissipate and remove a set amount of Metaforce percentage from the enemy's charge gauge. So this is a really great way to punish a lot of foes that make use of Metaforce reliant skills such as Laser or Ghost or something similar. This is a good way to cut down on that extra damage bonus to make sure they can't capitalize on it as often as they can. So this is a really great way to get under the skin of people that use full charge or charge plant or something of the like for that extra Metaforce bonus. Charge Drain is a variant of Discharge, but instead of just dissipating and removing a handful of charge, you actually charge your own gauge with it. So this is basically like a reverse Metaforce Punish in this sense, where you can use this on a Metaforce reliant build to basically serve as your passive Metaforce sustain whenever you're not using your nuke skill. One particular example of this would be Torpedo Beetle, who has Charge Blade and Charge Drain on the same kit. So he can essentially steal charge from an enemy and then unleash it on his own by himself with Charge Blade for a 1-2 hit combo. So pretty solid in that sense, and can be very easily capitalized on as a Metaforce Reliancy Punish in this case. Provoke is a rather simple skill, but if you use it correctly, it can be very frustrating on the field. And simply put, all it does is force the target to attack only the user. So in this case, think of maybe like Follow Me from Pokemon, where it forces anyone on the field to only attack that particular mon. And guarantee that any other ally can be safe from non-AoE based attacks, and buy them an extra turn or two to prep a skill or a nuke. Even if it means the one who used Provoke goes down, it still guarantees that their ally will live another day and maybe set up a revenge nuke against them. And then last but not least, the newest skill that was added at time of recording is Confusion. Now, a lot of folks who have played the earlier games will know this skill particularly well, but in this case of Metarot S, its general skill and description is no different. When inflicted with Confusion, it will prevent the target from being able to select their own actions for 3 turns, or their own target, which means they are completely on their own, almost like a forced auto in this case. This lasts for 3 turns or until the enemy is attacked, of which then you essentially knock them out of the confused state. Now with this, a lot of people may not understand how catastrophically dangerous and risky Confusion is, but what it does is that it chances a melee or a combat-based skill to attack an ally, or a support or healing skill to assist an enemy instead. One example I did see of this recently was when Alindi Earth came out, who is the current user of Confusion. They had a Rebirth user on the team that ended up reviving the enemy's fallen ally instead of their own ally to turn the tides of battle. I could honestly feel the salt in that one, so if you are watching this, I did hurt for you in that one. But it is also a very catastrophic skill if used correctly, but it is also a very niche one, as you can't fully rely on that likelihood of them attacking an ally or supporting you. So it's good to make use of, but not something that you want to rely on. So my overall thoughts on this, just to kind of wrap up this crash course on ailments, is basically learn what will and won't stack and find that sweet spot. Example I mentioned earlier is, say, Freeze and then Virus on top of each other, and you can repeat that maybe every 2 turns or so for a makeshift stun locking in this case, to guarantee that if the opponent is not someone you're going to pay attention to, you can at least guarantee they won't be able to take any turns at all. And if you can juggle this correctly, this is basically as efficient as any other kind of stun locking. Next up, coverage matters. You need to understand in this case what your team needs. Fill in holes with ailments. In this case, as some examples, consider slip or defense seal for shield counters. So if anyone has a perfect guard or counter guard in this sense, you can use slip or defense seal to guarantee that they can't use that shield, and also maybe unravel their strategy early on by killing the nuker faster than they want you to. Of all the ailments, it cannot also go without saying, beware stat cleanse. If there is a stat cleanser on the field and you have ailments, you want to kill them first, because if they put stat cleanse and get that active on the field, your entire strategy around ailments is now entirely useless. Now, one particular counter to this, if you are willing to factor it into the team, is Effect Clear. Now, it's not a generally useful skill in a lot of means, since it's very niche and requires positive effects to be active on the enemy in order to be dangerous. But if the enemy team is making use of Stat Cleanse, Effect Clear can very quickly remove that, deal extra damage, and also guarantee that you can still use ailments freely, as long as you ensure they cannot use Stat Cleanse again to reset it. Now, one other question I get asked a lot, especially by newer players, is there an end-all ailment? Nope. In this game, every ailment works, every ailment has a positive and a negative effect. So your job as a meta-rodder, both as a veteran and as a rookie, is to find that sweet spot as to what best fits your team. And don't be afraid to experiment either, because you might find what a lot of people consider useless, you might find is that one linchpin you need to guarantee your strategy will work and see you to victories for days on end and for days to come. But with all that being said, I believe that covers this week's this lesson, so thanks for stopping by, and essentially class dismissed in this case. If you'd like to know more, you can follow us below at the Metarot News Network page and the Metabots Forever community on Facebook. You can also join us on Discord at the link provided and in the comments below. And you can also reach out to me on Twitter personally at IsagamiKura. If you have any suggestions or feedback on this new mini-series or anything that you think that I should cover in future videos as a Robattle 101 mini-series, I'd love to hear it and get any extra feedback from you. And if you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out and ask. Don't be a stranger. I'm more than open to conversation. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. So until next time, this has been your host, Kura Isagami of the Metarot News Network, signing out.